If you think truth only lives in daylight, you've never seen what hides behind stained glass. Subscribe, like, and keep watching, because tonight's story takes you inside a confession no one was meant to hear. It began on a humid summer night in rural Indiana, the kind of night when cicadas scream loud enough to drown out regret. At 10:37 p.m., a 911 call came from a desolate stretch of county road, a woman's voice, panicked, whispering through sobs. "He won't let me out of the car, please. He said it'll ruin everything." Then static, then silence. The call was traced to a deacon's wife, Grace Holland, a devoted member of St. Matthew's Church. By morning, her sedan was found abandoned behind the church, the keys still in the ignition. Her shoes lay neatly at the front steps as if she'd paused to pray before vanishing into the dark. The town of Muncie had always trusted Pastor Daniel Rourke. For 20 years, he'd baptized their children, buried their dead, and stood at every hospital bed with a comforting hand. But that Sunday, he stood at the pulpit looking hollow, his sermon fractured, his smile mechanical. He spoke of sin, secrecy, and the weight of human temptation. The congregation thought he was moved by Grace's disappearance. In truth, he was unraveling. Detective Mara Kinley, a former FBI profiler turned local investigator, arrived at the scene that afternoon. She'd seen crime before, but something about the church unsettled her. The back door had been locked from the inside. The pastor's office smelled faintly of bleach, and his desk bore deep scratches, as if something heavy had been dragged. Behind a bookshelf, Mara's flashlight caught a flicker, a hairline gap in the wall, just wide enough for a hidden compartment. Inside, she found an old smartphone, its screen cracked, its battery drained. The church secretary swore it wasn't there before. When detectives powered it up at the station, it contained only one audio file. The recording was raw, uncut, Grace's voice, trembling. "You said God forgives everything, but this isn't forgiveness, Daniel. This is wrong." Then a deep breath, a man's whisper, "Grace, it'll be our secret." Mara froze. The timestamp was 11:02 p.m., 15 minutes after the 911 call had ended. The next morning, Pastor Rourke called a town-wide vigil, pleading for help in finding our lost sister. His eyes glistened with tears as cameras rolled. But when Mara looked closer, she noticed a red abrasion circling his wrist, like a rope mark. As the crowd bowed their heads in prayer, a deputy quietly approached Mara, holding something wrapped in plastic. It was a gold cross pendant, Grace's, stained with what appeared to be rust or dry blood. It had been found buried behind the pulpit, just beneath the choir floor. And then came the moment that made Mara's heart stop. Inside the hollow base of the cross was a note, written in frantic, looping handwriting. He said God would understand. He said I had confessed before he did. The town thought they were praying for Grace's safe return. Detective Kinley knew better. She was already standing at a crime scene, and the pastor's sermon wasn't about faith anymore. It was about guilt. The morning after the vigil, rain swept across Muncie like a cleansing ritual that didn't quite take. Reporters camped outside St. Matthew's, their microphones pointed toward the church doors, waiting for the man of God, who was suddenly the center of a criminal investigation. Detective Mara Kinley arrived before sunrise. The church looked different now, less like a sanctuary, more like a tomb. The once inviting stained glass shimmered dull and cold, the air inside thick with mildew and unease. Pastor Rourke's office had been sealed, yet the faint smell of ammonia still clung to the hallway. Mara met with Sheriff Dwayne Lasker, a gruff man who'd known Rourke for decades. He hated what was happening. "Dan's a good man," he muttered. "He's done more for this town than anyone. You're telling me he's capable of this?" Mara didn't answer. She'd learned that guilt wore the same face as grace until the moment truth tore it apart. She laid out the evidence. The hidden phone, the blood-stained pendant, and now, a new detail. Forensic results showing the rust on the cross was human blood. Female. But that wasn't all. Digital forensics traced the phone's location data. It had been active behind the church for 3 hours on the night Grace vanished, and then powered off exactly 32 seconds after the 911 call ended. By noon, Mara obtained a warrant to search Rourke's home. His wife, Ellen, answered the door, pale and trembling. She insisted her husband had been home by midnight, praying in his study. When Mara asked if she could look inside the study, Ellen hesitated, then whispered, "Please, don't take him away." He said it was an accident. Inside the study, the walls were lined with theological books, but one shelf drew Mara's eye. Behind it, dust patterns didn't match. Some had been moved recently. She pulled the shelf slightly, and behind it was a narrow crawl space filled with old church relics, boxes of donation receipts, and a canvas bag covered in dirt. Inside the bag were women's items, jewelry, makeup, scarves, each tagged with a year. 2017, 2019, 2021. There were 6 in total. Mara's pulse quickened. "These aren't just keepsakes," she said under her breath. "They're trophies." When the evidence team arrived, Ellen broke down. He told me they all came to him for help, that they'd sinned, that he was saving them. Her sobs turned to gasps. I believed him. Later that evening, Mara brought Rourke in for questioning. He arrived in his clerical collar, calm and composed, as if heading into Sunday service. When shown the audio recording, his expression didn't falter. "I did what I had to do," he said softly. "Grace came to me broken. She wanted to be cleansed. I tried to help her." "Help her?" Mara pressed. "By burying her behind your church?" Rourke leaned back, eyes glinting under the interrogation light. "You think I buried her? Detective, you don't understand. Grace isn't the first to disappear from that congregation. I covered for them, but I wasn't alone." The room fell silent. Mara felt the air shift. "Who's them, Pastor?" she asked. He smiled faintly, like a man about to deliver a sermon. "The ones who built this church. The ones who believe some sins are better left buried." Before Mara could respond, a deputy burst through the door, his face pale. They'd just uncovered something behind the church. A shallow grave, and inside not one but 2 skeletons, both female, and only one of them was Grace. The town of Muncie woke to sirens echoing through the mist. St. Matthew's Church, once a beacon of faith, was now surrounded by crime scene tape and flashing lights. The discovery of 2 female skeletons behind the chapel had broken the case wide open, but also raised a darker question. Who else was buried in the name of God? Detective Mara Kinley stood near the muddy graves, rain dripping off her coat. The smell of decay mixed with the damp earth, heavy and sour. Forensic crews worked carefully, unearthing what was left of lives long forgotten. One of the bodies was confirmed as Grace Holloway, the woman who vanished after Pastor Rourke's sermon. The other? Older remains, badly decomposed. No ID yet. Inside the church, Rourke sat silently in the sanctuary. He hadn't asked for a lawyer. He only wanted to speak in God's house. Mara joined him, the air thick with a musty scent of candle wax and old wood. "You said you weren't alone," she began, her tone measured. "Who else is responsible?" Rourke turned slowly toward the altar, his eyes glassy. "You think sin begins with a sinner, detective. But here, sin is tradition." He motioned toward an old portrait on the wall, a line of founding pastors, faces solemn and proud. "Every man in that picture," he said softly, "knew what we buried. This church was built on redemption, but sometimes redemption required sacrifice." Mara frowned. "Are you saying there were more victims?" He nodded faintly. "Every few years, a woman came forward, broken, guilty. We were told to cleanse them in the name of faith. I didn't kill them, Mara. I helped hide what was already done." She felt her stomach tighten. "Who told you to?" Rourke looked up, his eyes distant. "You already met her." For a second, Mara didn't understand. Then she remembered Ellen Rourke, his wife, the quiet, trembling woman who begged her not to take him away. That night, Ellen was brought in for questioning. She appeared calm, almost serene. When confronted with Rourke's confession, she simply folded her hands. "My husband was weak," she said. "He thought sin could be washed away with prayer. But sin must be buried, detective. Only then does the soul rest." "Are you admitting to murder?" Mara asked. Ellen smiled faintly. "I'm admitting to mercy." Hours later, forensics returned with another discovery. A 3rd burial site near the church garden, beneath the statue of St. Mary. This one was fresher. Inside the shallow grave lay another woman's remains, along with silver wedding ring engraved with Ellen's initials. When confronted, Ellen's composure finally cracked. "She tried to expose us," she whispered. "Grace found the other's jewelry in our home. She wasn't supposed to see it. I begged Dan to stop her, but he froze. So I did what he couldn't." Her voice trembled. "I only meant to silence her for a moment." Mara's pen dropped. The truth hit like a hammer. It wasn't the pastor who killed Grace. It was his wife. And for years, he covered her sins under the veil of faith. Ellen was arrested that night. Pastor Rourke, shaken and broken, gave his final sermon from a jail cell, streamed live to an empty congregation. "I preached forgiveness," he said, voice hollow. "But in the end, I only taught people how to hide their sins." As Mara left the church for the last time, the rain began again, soft, endless, and gray. The cross above St. Matthew's tilted slightly, its shadow stretching over the graves like a scar that would never fade. Weeks later, the town tried to move on. The church was closed permanently, its doors chained, its windows dark. But every few nights, locals swore they heard faint hymns echoing from within, Rourke's final sermon looping in the silence. Sin is never buried. His voice would whisper through the static. It waits for confession. And with that, the story of the pastor and his wife, the couple who buried faith beneath the weight of guilt, was sealed forever in the cold soil behind St. Matthew's. If you thought this story was chilling, wait until you hear what happened in the church next door. Hit subscribe, because the next story might just be happening in your town.